The sensation is familiar to everyone. You sit down with the conscious intent to study or work. The goal is clear and the necessity is absolute. Yet within minutes, the theater of your imagination is invaded. Distraction fantasies enter the mind uninvited. A sudden urge to check a notification, a craving for a snack, a realization that the room needs cleaning. These are not random thoughts. They are unconscious forces negotiating for control. It feels like a discipline problem. It feels like a failure of will. But here is the reality. You are not fighting against laziness. You are fighting against biology. Your brain is being hijacked by a chemical mismatch between its ancient evolution and the modern environment. We are not going to discuss generic productivity tips. We are not going to suggest a simple to-do list. Instead, we will analyze the 4 neuropsychological barriers that physically prevent deep focus. We will deconstruct why the brain actively rejects effort and how to surgically alter your neurochemistry to make hard work feel as addictive as entertainment. This is the mechanics of dopamine loading. The neurochemical baseline. To understand why focus is impossible, one must first understand the currency of the brain, dopamine. It is often misunderstood as a pleasure molecule. In reality, it is a molecule of craving and motivation. It is the engine that drives the brain to seek. Imagine the brain's dopamine system as a delicate scale. This scale has a baseline setting. In a natural environment, this baseline is stable. Effort leads to reward, and the scale balances. However, the modern environment acts like a heat-seeking missile. Short-form videos, social media, and processed sugar provide a feast of pure, concentrated dopamine. They require zero effort and provide instant novelty. Every swipe is a new shock. Every notification is a new variable reward. When the brain is exposed to this flood, it does not just enjoy it, it recalibrates. The baseline for stimulation rises dramatically. This is the concept of homeostasis. The body always seeks to maintain stability. If you flood the system with cheap dopamine, the brain downregulates its receptors to cope. It becomes numb to subtle pleasures. This creates a physiological problem for studying or working. Academic and professional tasks sit at the bottom of the pleasure scale. They are slow. They demand high effort. The reward is distant, often months or years away. Compared to the instant hit of a digital feed, studying registers as pain. It is not that the subject is boring. It is that the brain is chemically deafened to anything that does not scream. This is why staring at a textbook feels physically excruciating. You are experiencing chemical withdrawal. The brain is screaming for its usual feast, and the text offers only a famine. But the baseline is only the first barrier. The second barrier determines the success of the entire day before the sun has even fully risen. How does one reverse this sensitivity? The contrast trap. Most people begin their day with a catastrophic error. The moment consciousness returns, the hand reaches for the phone, messages are checked, feeds are scrolled. A flood of light and information hits the neural pathways. This creates an immediate artificial spike in dopamine. Graphically, the day begins at a peak, but what goes up must come down. The brain, reacting to this spike, triggers a compensatory drop below the baseline. This is the crash. By the time one attempts to study at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m., they are operating in a dopamine trough. In this low dopamine state, motivation is biologically absent. Focus becomes a hellish experience. The brain, desperate to return to the peak, generates anxiety and boredom. It demands another hit to fix the deficit. This creates a cycle of fluctuation, a spike from the phone, followed by a crash during work. The brain never finds the stability required for deep thought. Deep work requires a low stimulation environment to be appreciated. If the brain has tasted the highest highs in the morning, it cannot tolerate the neutral state of work. It is like trying to listen to a whisper immediately after standing next to a jet engine. The solution requires a radical shift in how the day is structured. It requires a commitment to a path to mastering one's own mind and finding genuine fulfillment. But before we restructure the day, we must restructure the identity, because even with a perfect chemical balance, there is a part of the psyche that will still resist. Who is the entity that decides to stop working? The identity mechanism. Freud described the psyche as a battleground. There is the conscious intent, the ego, but there is also the id. The id contains the ancient biological subsystems: hunger, aggression, comfort, instant gratification. These subsystems are like autonomous spirits. They do not care about grades or career goals. They care about the present moment. When you force yourself to study through sheer will, you are declaring war on these subsystems. And eventually, will depletes. The subsystems win. To bypass this, we must use the technique of identity shifting. Behavior is a reflection of identity. A person who identifies as an athlete does not need willpower to go to the gym. It is simply what they do. Currently, the brain identifies as a consumer of content, not a creator of knowledge. We must gamify the process to trick the ID. The brain loves progress, levels, and completion. It loves the structure of a video game. By breaking study material into small, conquerable chunks and tracking experience points, or XP, we trigger microdoses of dopamine associated with achievement. We can also use temptation bundling. This involves pairing a high dopamine activity specifically with the low dopamine task. For example, a specific coffee or playlist that is only allowed during study sessions. This conditions the animal brain to anticipate the reward only through the gateway of the work. But these are tactical adjustments. They are bandages. To truly solve the problem of focus, we must implement a strategic overhaul of the daily timeline. We must invert the typical day. We must deploy the protocol of dopamine loading. How does one consume entertainment without destroying focus? The dopamine loading protocol. The concept of dopamine loading relies on delayed gratification. It is based on the principle that the brain operates on contrast. If we remove the high peaks from the beginning of the day, the middle becomes bearable. Here is the operational protocol. Phase 1. The fast. Upon waking, the phone remains untouched. No digital light, no scrolling, no music. The brain remains at its overnight baseline. Actions are mechanical. Hydrate, move, meditate. By depriving the brain of an early hit, we preserve its sensitivity. Phase 2. The heavy lift. The most difficult tasks must be executed immediately. In this low dopamine state, the brain is calm. It is not crashing because it has not yet spiked. Studying becomes the most stimulating thing happening simply because nothing else is happening. Boredom becomes a superpower. If you sit in a room with nothing but a wall and a book, eventually the book becomes a source of entertainment. Phase 3. The loading. This is where the strategy diverges from standard advice. We do not eliminate high dopamine activities. We move them to the very end of the day. After the work is complete, after the sun has set, the restriction is lifted. High carbohydrate meals, entertainment, social media. These are placed in the evening block. This serves two functions. First, it protects the working hours from the crash. Second, it creates a massive anticipation reward. The brain learns that the only way to access the dopamine feast is to complete the labor. It rewires the association of work. Work becomes the key that unlocks the pleasure. The contrast works in your favor. The evening relaxation feels significantly better because it has been earned. It is guilt-free. The low dopamine morning makes the work possible. The high dopamine evening makes the life enjoyable. This balance prevents the burnout of total restriction while avoiding the paralysis of total indulgence. It is a system of control. By managing the timing of neurochemistry, you are no longer a slave to impulses. You are the architect of your own experience. This is the path to mastering one's own mind and finding genuine fulfillment. The inability to focus is not a character flaw. It is a mismanagement of biological resources. By resetting the baseline, protecting the morning from artificial spikes, and loading rewards at the end of the day, the brain's natural hunger for progress is restored. The resistance fades, and the work begins.